So plain language is a term that's often bandied about, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I like to kind of step back from plain language and say, well, what's the benefit in the context of a business or a larger organization? And if we think about language in general, it is the way in which people communicate. The written word is the way in which contracts are communicated, business agreements, internal or external, emails floating around. It's all written language. And if you write overtly complex language in those contexts, you will often get a number of consequences. You get misinterpretation. People will not get the message that you intended. That then causes waste because people go and do certain things that you didn't anticipate. And that then causes a kind of a review need and a need to go back and actually have another crack at that. What's an example of that? If I'm in a situation where I'm writing, let's say, a business requirements document or some kind of specification for a new kind of service offering, and I write sentences that are way too long, multi-clausal compound sentences with multiple different ideas and thoughts, the likelihood of misinterpreting those becomes higher. So plain language advocates would often suggest that write with short, punchy sentences, decompose long, complex sentences. The second thing that plain language will often kind of suggest is to use active voice over passive voice. Not necessarily exclusively. There is times when passive voice can be useful, but active voice, and to give you an idea of what that actually means, if I say, and you'll hear politicians saying this a lot, if I say mistakes were made in a certain consequence, so some politician is held over the coals because things went screwed up or they went wrong, they will evade attribution. Mistakes were made. On the other hand, if I say I made a mistake, that builds trust. It builds a better degree of relationship to the person reading this or hearing it. The reason active voice is preferable over passive voice is because it's very clear who did the action and what the result of that action was. Mistakes were made, not clear. So if I'm doing a business requirements document and I write in passive voice, alerts will be issued. What is going to issue the alert? When will it be issued? What frequency? There's so many questions that go into that. And that simple statement looks compelling, but actually becomes potentially very large and leads to potentially scope creep, which basically means what you thought you were building may not necessarily be what you end up having to build. And that costs businesses money. So long sentences and passive voice, and replacing long sentences with short, punchy sentences, passive voice with active voice are really important. A third element about plain language principles is not to use jargon or gobbledygook. And that's all about the idea of, we're all human beings. We're all trying to communicate. If I'm talking to a customer and I'm using insider speak or jargon that I and my colleagues are familiar with, but you as a customer are not, that becomes a really big point of friction. And all that does is it jams up your call centers. It causes disenfranchisement for the person reading this content, and it causes them to feel not adequate, which is never a good look for any brand to have. Great example of this, in fact, was with Sun Life, where we were working with them. And they rewrote 11 letters of correspondence that were going out to consumers. In the case of Sun Life, it's a financial institution. They're selling insurance policies, et cetera, et cetera. And rewriting those 11 letters resulted in a reduction of inbound queries into their call center of 19%. And it also reduced the number of actually requeries, in other words, subsequent clarifications, by 23%. So it was a very tangible way by using plain language principles to reduce the cost in terms of the overheads in operations in the business. So in a nutshell, there's a few things I always recommend for plain language: reduce long sentences, change passive voice to active, and remove the jargon.